Welcome to the 2023 edition of TWAS-The Next. I'm Luca, an AI-generated speaker who will presenting our festival. In the next 3 days, we will be talking about a new world. This is the title of the 12th edition of our Festival of Science. Innovation and research, the ethical limits and new frontiers of science will be the center of all our events. What will the new world be like? Will we be able to face the challenges of the near future applying new scientific discoveries and technologies in a sustainable way? This will be the underlying theme of TWAS-The Next, with 100 events in English and Italian, the Science Book of the Year Literary Award, 300 speakers, 70 activities for schools and 40 exhibition spaces that are open for everybody in the city center close to the town hall. Before leaving the floor to our next panelists, I would like to thank all the scientific institutions within the TWAS-The City of Knowledge Network, the main partner together with our content partners and sponsors for supporting our project. Mostly, thank you to the 200 volunteers who are helping us. I have one last remark for all of you. The next event will last 75 minutes. Our speakers will answer all of your questions in the final 15 minutes. Also, please remember to check the updated schedule of events on our website. Thank you and enjoy our festival.
Good evening. Third time lucky. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, a warm welcome to this panel session by the World Academy of Sciences. My name is Max Pauli, and I work for this organization, and therefore I would like to start by telling you what this organization is all about. Yes, the first, thank you. The first presentation, please, yes. So the World Academy of Sciences is a program unit of UNESCO. And I'm sure you've heard the name UNESCO. It's actually an abbreviation. It's the United Nations organization that looks after science, education, and culture. Although this evening we'll focus predominantly on science with significant and relevance on culture and education as well. So I welcome you to this panel, which, as you can see the title, Science as a Development Tool, the Capacity We Need for the Future We Want. So the Academy works a lot in this direction. First of all, an Academy of Sciences is an organization, is an institution that selects through stringent election very prestigious scientists. So the Academy is a global academy and has high-profile scientists from all over the world. In addition to this, the Academy also implements capacity building programs. What are these programs? They are efforts and activities to increase the research skills in developing countries, together with also strengthening the research infrastructure, which means laboratories, with an emphasis on the young scientists, bearing in mind that interdisciplinary research is really important. Therefore, we catalyze collaborations. And last but not least, we celebrate scientific achievement and excellence in research through prizes. The World Academy of Sciences is one of the scientific organizations in the TWAS science system. So we're lucky to be part of a scientific, rich atmosphere, and in fact, we actively collaborate with other institutions in Trieste, like CISA, ICTP, ICGB, OGS and others, almost all of them. They participate in at least one of the programs that we have. So overall, these programs have made the Academy a leader in capacity building for science and technology in developing countries, with an increasing focus over the last decade on least developed countries. LDCs stands for least developed countries. These are the countries in which the need for science and technology is the most urgent. As I said before, we also placed a lot of emphasis on young scientists and women scientists. Science diplomacy is extremely important in all of this because it pushes scientists to reach out to policymakers. The science policy dialogue is essential to resolve the challenges that we have in front of us. Interdisciplinary collaborations are key to address complex challenges. And finally, the complex challenges that we are talking about, or referring to, are the ones that are limiting a path to sustainable development. So today, this panel brings together 4 of the best scientists of the Academy. And you see them here representing 4 geographically diverse areas of the world. So at the very end, we have Helena Nader from South America. And then, not in order of the map, but let me go in order of the chairs. Then we have Iqbal Choudhary from the Asian region. And then at the center, we have Quarraisha Abdool Karim, representing the African region. And then to my left, we have Sabah AlMomin, representing the Arab region. I think this will be an extremely stimulating, rich panel because of the diversity of geographical perspectives, but perhaps we will also see some underlying commonalities in challenges. So let's start with a brief presentation by Professor Abdool Karim, who is the president of the World Academy of Sciences. In addition, she is also from an organization in South Africa called CAPRISA, where she's the scientific director of that institution where key research is carried out on AIDS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max. Good evening, everyone. It's such an honor and privilege to be part of the TWAS-Next festival and to watch all the enthusiasm and excitement that everyone is displaying in science and being part of all of the activities. So as Max described, I'm from South Africa. I live on the east coast of South Africa in a town called Durban. And I am an infectious diseases epidemiologist. And I think with COVID-19, I don't have to explain what epidemiologists do or what epidemics or pandemics are. But 2 of the top causes of deaths in sub-Saharan Africa and continues in Eastern and Southern Africa is HIV and TB. The center that I work in focuses on 2 questions. The one is how to prevent HIV infection in young women, and the other is how to prevent deaths in people living with HIV and TB. And so I want to start by giving you a little description about why the focus on these two questions. And way back in 1990, we did a population-based survey that showed that South Africa was at a very early stage of the HIV epidemic. We had a prevalence of infection of around 1%. But what was striking in that data in 1990 was that women had 4 times more infection than men, and 2, women acquired infection 5 to 7 years earlier than men. So if we looked at data in women 15 to 24 years, even more recently, you'll find that by age 20, about 1 in 10 women is infected with HIV. And by age 25, that's like every other woman. And so when you get to about age 60, we're talking about an HIV prevalence of about 70%. So that's 70%. So it gives you some indication of the magnitude of the problem, 1, but 2, the ongoing high burden. Now, HIV is not restricted to Southern Africa, South Africa, or Sub-Saharan Africa, but we find HIV distributed across the world. And if we had to take infections globally, and we just take the past year where we saw about 1.5 million new infections, about 60% of those infections are in Eastern and Southern Africa. So what we're dealing with is a problem that's global, but also very local. And so when you see data like what I described about young women acquiring infection, you look at, so what is available to prevent infection in these young women? And so way back in 1992, shortly after the survey, we started to do these interviews with women in different settings, urban, rural, peri-urban. And the thing that we came up with after these many surveys was that women understood their risk, why they're getting infected. But there was not a single thing they could do to prevent getting infected, because everything we had available depended on male cooperation. So what did we have was male condoms. Abstinence, they're abstinent, their partner is not. And I couldn't spend a long time describing all of this, but the gap that we had was technologies for preventing infection. So some 18 years ago, well, more than that, in 1994, we started to look for a method that women can use and initiate. And we call that women-initiated technologies or microbicides. And it took us 18 years to finally find a way to prevent infection in young women. So in 2010, we announced to the world the results of a trial that we started, which was using antiretrovirals, specifically tenofovir, used by uninfected women, demonstrated proof of concept of pre-exposure prophylaxis. So we're all familiar with ARVs to treat AIDS, and we've seen how treatment, and particularly equitable treatment access through programs like the United States Presidential Emergency Program for AIDS Relief and the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and Malaria really enabled the almost 40 million people in Africa to access ARVs and to change AIDS from an inevitably fatal condition to one that's chronic and manageable. So here we found another way of use of ARVs, and a single ARV to use by uninfected women preventing infection. And today, of course, we have many options of different drugs, different drug delivery methods based on use of antiretrovirals that is increasingly become available for anyone at risk, uninfected, to continue to maintain their HIV negative status. I just wanted to touch for a minute on TB, because 70% of people in the absence of ARV progress to AIDS, and one of the most common opportunistic infections that we have is tuberculosis. So TB is a major global challenge independent of HIV, but when you have HIV not on treatment, it is one of the major causes of deaths. And what we didn't have was a way to figure out when to initiate ARV treatment in those who have HIV and TB. And so we figured out the timing of doing that, and that generated guidelines that are used across Africa, in fact across the world, and it's part of WHO guidelines in terms of management of people with HIV and TB. I wanted to sort of wrap up on two issues. The one is, so where are we now? So we did a whole lot of work to try and understand the findings that we had on PrEP and a large field of microbiomics, and I can talk a little bit more about it. But in the process of studying natural infection of clade C HIV infection, which is a specific type of HIV that now accounts for over 70% of all infections globally, we identified a participant of ours who was taking part in a prevention trial, got infected, and as we followed her up about 10 years later, we had other scientists describe a phenomena of broadly neutralizing antibodies. So once you get infected with HIV, you develop antibodies. These antibodies in themselves are not sufficient to prevent progression to disease. And this particular person who produced these very broadly neutralizing antibodies that are effective against more than 80% of the circulating viruses, we were able to identify the single B cell that produces these antibodies. It's like a needle in the haystack project. It took many people, many hundreds of people, young scientists, etc. We found the cell and we immortalized it, we improved those cells, and we tested this antibody in animals, and we gave them the antibody and then exposed them to the animal-specific HIV. And to date, none of the animals who had the antibody then exposed or challenged to the virus got infected. So we then started to develop bigger lots, and you know, when you develop antibodies, 3 grams, if you can imagine, like about a few specks on, if you put it under the microscope. And we've done the first in human studies that show it's safe. We've done it in combination with another very potent antibody to increase the breadth of its effectiveness or its cover. And we figured out the right dose to use, and that particular dose allows us to administer this every 6 months. And now we're moving to the phase 2B studies to try and look at, does it offer protection? So all I'll say is this is a really exciting success from participation, big teams working together, coming together to focus on this problem of how do we prevent infection in young women. So we did PrEP and now the antibodies. The exciting part about the broadly neutralizing antibodies is because we did these longitudinal studies, we have data that we've collected over time, and we know exactly what type of virus enabled this particular antibody to be developed. And so we have a way, if it offers protection, to reverse engineer this and potentially put us on a smart pathway to a vaccine. So while we've done a lot for HIV/AIDS across the globe, until we have a vaccine and a cure, we cannot call it the end of AIDS in terms of elimination, etc. And so this is the exciting part I wanted to leave you with, and happy to answer questions after all the presentations. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Abdul Karim. Next, I would like to introduce Professor Sabah AlMomin, immediately to my left. She's a researcher at the KISR, again another abbreviation, but let me say what it means. It's the Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research. Therefore, very interested to hear from you, Professor AlMomin.
Well, thank you very much to give me the pleasure to join you in your celebration of the Science Festival. I'm very honored to address you. I'm given 5 minutes to give a whole biotechnology applications in massive areas. But I'll try to touch and give you just a glimpse of things that is ongoing, and I'll stress on the region, which has a lot of challenges. As you know, the Arab region, MENA region, has many challenges beside being developing countries. It's the challenge of agriculture, of food availability, of pollution, of conflicts, of everything that you can think of, it's there. I was the first one to study genetics and go back to Kuwait. And then when people at that time hear about genetics, they throw all the ideas into your face, do this, do that. Well, it's not magic. So it's quite a challenge, first of all, to educate people about genetics and DNA and all that, and establish the infrastructure and labs and train people into all these areas. So the first thing that I will shed a light on is on the bioproducts using biotechnology, where you have all this waste, the effluents, the household waste, the industrial organic waste, the wastewater, all of this, you will be able to treat it using microbes or their products. Basically, you put it in a refinery, and then you will get a clean water, you will get fertilizers, biofuels, bioplastics. So this is one application that is ongoing in the region. One of it is Egypt, which is producing now biofuels, hydrogen and graphene from solid waste. The United Arab Emirates had the first leap into developing biofuels and actually use it in the airplanes and buses, and that was a big success. Saudi Arabia produced biofuel from dates, which is dates is the national fruit in the area. The United Arab Emirates, actually, they produce the biofuels from algae and agricultural wastes, which are plants, desert plants, basically, and algae. They grow in the desert and extract the biofuel. Which one? Okay, so on the other thing is the problem of plastics in the world, which we all know about and how to get rid of them. So microbes have, some of them have this ability to digest and chew the plastics. So this is what they apply the microbe into the degradation of plastics, and a lot of research going on in the region in that. There's also little creatures, marine creatures, the krills, which is like tiny shrimp. They are able actually to digest the plastics. And then when you degrade the plastics, of course, you need the plastic because now we get so much used to having plastic everywhere. So you produce the bioplastics from the waste, agricultural waste and organic waste, again in the refinery, microbial processing or derivatives of that to produce the plastics, the degradable plastics. On the agriculture area, Egypt has adopted recently the genetically modified wheat, which is disease resistant, along with cotton, modified cotton, again disease resistant, and that will reduce the use of pesticides in the product. And so their success was in the wheat, they increased the production by 7%, and in the cotton, 33% increased in the production. Other things that is going is using the tissue culture technology, where you actually dissect plants into tiny, tiny little pieces, and you mass produce them in the lab, and then you transfer them to the field. Many countries, the Gulf countries, are doing that, mainly date palm and native plants. It goes into the food security, and date palm, it has very nutritious value and economic value. So this is what we do in Kuwait, in Emirates, in Saudi, in Morocco, is the tissue culture. On the animal side, there's the cloning of camels, and this is going on in Dubai, and this is choosing the elite camels, which are for the racing, for beauty competitions. It has a high value. So, I mean, they're expensive animals, and so that's what they do, they clone it. In Kuwait, before that, I actually introduced the embryo transfer and cloning of sheep, because our sheep does not reproduce so much. So I wanted to make it bring twins. So what I did is I took the embryos, I fertilized them, I dissect them and put them back. And so I got a lot of babies from just one couple. So the next slide is going to be the last because of the time. In the bioremediation and the environmental pollution, I cannot skip the disaster, the pollution disaster of Kuwait, which is in 1990 with the conflict of our neighbor countries, and where they put on fire all the oil wells. And we had about 600 to 700 oil wells burning, which resulted in hundreds of oil lakes. Now these oil lakes stayed on soil, and then the animals, as you can see, all contaminated with this oil. So we had to find ways for that, and that was to clean up the animals, and some other things is to produce biosurfactant that can chew the oil off them. And the oil lakes, we made physical, chemical, microbial degradation of the soil. As you can see, we use heavy equipment, we take the soil, we flip it around, we enrich it with microbes that can digest the hydrocarbons and the petrol, and so it gets, with time, it gets treated, and the result is this flowery agriculture, clean soil. We also use biotechnology in developing, modifying some plants to absorb the rest of the heavy metals from the soil. So I think this is all I have time for. I cannot go anymore because... So thank you very much.
Well, I thank you for keeping to time, but also for the fascinating environmental references that you made. Our next panel speaker is Professor Choudhary. He is the director of ICCBS. Let me explain the abbreviation. International Center for Chemical and Biological Sciences in Pakistan. Now, ICCBS is not just a very well-known international center, but is also a TWAS partner because they host many of the awarded young scientists that the academy helps, and they get helped even further enjoying the laboratory infrastructure and tuition there. So Professor Choudhary, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Max. Thank you very much, everyone, to be here with us in this late hours of the evening. It was such a wonderful day. And what I'm going to speak about is about neglected tropical diseases. You see, this is something which we often neglect because it is neglected by all definitions of the word. I mean, neglected in a sense because these diseases are common in the poorest of the world. Okay. Second, that among the poorest, these diseases are more prevalent in women, children, and people with disabilities. They are neglected because the communities are marginalized and they do not have any political voice. They neglected in a sense that no one is willing to invest in the treatment of these diseases because it is not within the paradigm of global pharmaceutical business, and it is in fact neglected by media and others. So you don't really hear about them. And my introduction to neglected tropical diseases was completely accidental. And I came back from US in 1998, spent about 8 years or 10 years of working on one single disease, epilepsy. And I was so indulged in developing some of the drug candidates which went into phase 2 clinical trials. On one day, in the morning when I was reading a newspaper called Herald, there was a full-page article about the migration of people from Afghanistan due to civil war, and there were articles that WHO has declared emergency and they are airlifting medicines for a disease which I never heard of, leishmaniasis, cutaneous leishmaniasis. And they gave a number which was just, I don't remember, but it was just a huge number. And therefore I decided to go and visit that place. So I visited along with my research team, and I've seen horrifying scenes. I've seen young children with scars on their face, with lesions, with all these terrible pictures of young men, women, young children, young girls. And you see, if in countries like ours, if a young girl develop scars on the face, become stigmatized, and then you would very hard for them to actually move on to their life and find a life partner also. So it was just an absolute life-changing experience for me, and then I decided to work on this. So let me just tell you what these diseases are. There are about 20 and 21 diseases according to the definition. If you go to WHO definition, there are about 20. If you go to US CDC, there are about 21, and these are infectious diseases. So you've heard of infectious diseases. Our president has spoken about that. And these diseases are caused by parasites, protozoa, fungi, bacteria, viruses, and a whole range of different things also. Extremely, extremely common diseases, and you find them literally in hundreds of countries. Now, if you talk about the treatment of these diseases, I can give you an old statistics because the recent one is not available. During 1995 to 2015, 20 years, 2 decades, 1,340 new molecular entities were developed as medicines, and only 12 of them were neglected tropical diseases. So you can envision the kind of neglect which science, politicians, policymakers, research funders are actually neglecting these diseases which are really affecting large number of people. So it doesn't include malaria, it doesn't include tuberculosis also, because they somehow got some attention because of multiple reasons, including HIV, TB, co-infection. But these diseases are really neglected because all definitions of neglect. The most important part of it that, you look into the prevalence of these diseases. They are in tropical and subtropical countries of the world, affecting 1.65 billion people in 179 countries. Now these are WHO figures. These are the people who have in their lifetime at least suffered with one of the NTD. So this is a number which is coming from WHO. Over half of the world population lives in areas where neglected tropical diseases are endemic, And health and economic burden of entities are greater than malaria, tuberculosis, HIV combined together, but they are unfortunately not being reported because they are, from the statistics to all kind of information which one need to understand the complexity of issues are unfortunately not available. So they are called neglected, as I mentioned, because of number of reasons, and global investment in R&D for the treatment and diagnosis in NTDs is remarkably low. Very, very less investment is available if you wish to work on NTDs is hardly. Of course, there are some pharmaceutical conglomerates, there are some government institutions, R&D organizations which are investing some amount of money also, but that all money put together is less than the amount of money spent on R&D against obesity. So you can envision that obesity is certainly a very important disease, and it has a whole range of different, but this is actually affecting real people. So if you look into the map of it, so we find this from Latin America, from South America, all the way to Africa, and then all the way to Far East, and the colors represent the number of these entities. So if there are more entities, you find red, about 6 tropical diseases, and 1 and 2 and 3, 4 of them. So they are extremely common, especially in Africa, and they are very, very common in Africa. Now, the real problem is the prevalence is certainly there. There are some medicines which are available, not developed for them. These are repurposed drugs. So 95% of the medicines which are used for the treatment of NTDs were not developed for the treatment of NTDs. These are repurposed drugs developed for something else and then being used for treatment of some of these diseases. And as a result, there is not very effective or safe treatments are available because they are not really focused or targeted medicine. Now the question is why it is happening, because there is very little science in understanding the diseases at molecular level. So we do not really know how these diseases emerge, how these diseases infect human host. What are the factors behind that? There are a lot of zoonotic vectors, and so there are a lot of carriers in between. And very little is known about the actual drug target. So science of neglected tropical diseases is neglected, is not available. And if you wish to work on it, you look into any of these diseases, schistosomiasis, which is one of the most prevalent disease, or leishmaniasis or trypsinoma or something, you would hardly find 100 and 200 papers on actual biochemistry, the actual molecular biology of these diseases. So science can make a whole lot of a difference. From 2009 onward, I changed my course of research. I've been working on identifying new targets, largely in cutaneous leishmaniasis. And then we have a consortium of scientists working in Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, India and Pakistan, along with some scientists in UK who are from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Diseases. We're working together on the identification of diseases. So scientists have to work on it, and there is a greater investment of pharmaceutical sector is required in the NTD drug discovery and development, because these diseases are affecting very large number of people. NTD should receive more emphasis in new sustainable development goals beyond 2030, and scientists from north and south have to work together to find effective treatment. The reason that these diseases are no more tropical or subtropical. With the climate change, you will find them everywhere, including Norway and Scandinavia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Choudhary. Just a quick comment. I think you appreciate the level of collaboration, interdisciplinarity, and international connections that Professor Choudhary touched upon with all that research. Our last speaker of the panel is Professor Nader. She is the head of the IPMB. It's the Institute of Pharmacology and Molecular Biology at the Federal University of Sao Paulo. So we look forward to hearing your perspectives.
Thank you so much. May I have the first slide, please? I want to thank Max and TWAS for the invitation to be here. It's an honor, and especially with our president and the other scientists in this panel. I'm a glycobiologist. I work with complex carbohydrates. That's why the name glyco. And one of the compounds is heparin. But just stay calm. I'm not going to talk about that. I decided that I want to discuss with you something that's in the news everywhere, in the TV, in the papers, everywhere. The Amazon and the world, and why it's important. And I'm going to bring some data for that. That's a picture from the Amazon. The first thing that I want you people, and there is a lot of young generation in here, is pay attention to the color of the water. It's brown. It's not green. It's a brown water. And science as a development tool, the name of our panel, the capacity we need for the future we want. Let's see if I can take a message for that. So here's the Amazon region. You can see, may I stand? Yes. Thank you. I'm used to give classes. I'm too old to change habits. So here is the Amazon globally speaking. We are 8.5 million square kilometers, 5.5 million kilometers of tropical rainforest, and 8 countries in order: Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Peru, Venezuela, Suriname, and a French territory, that's Guyana, French Guyana. So 8 countries and a territory. And if you take this picture in here, this is part of Europe, and this is just the Brazilian Amazon, what we call the part of, you can see that's not a small place, globally speaking. And we are going to check about who is living there, because it's important. We all want to save the planet, but we need to save the people that are in the Amazon too. So, here it is, indigenous people, 2.2 million, more than 400 different groups with more than 300 different languages and cultures and behaviors. And if we go to the Brazilian Amazon, the region, the Brazilian Amazon is about 29.6 million people, and the indigenous about 900, with more than 20 ethnic groups. You cannot put all of them together because they are different in origin, different in costumes, and we need to acknowledge that. Biodiversity concentrates more than 10%, 13, 15, depends on the data, of the global biodiversity, and this is something that I want you to pay attention. We always think of the Amazon as rainforest. Sorry, you're wrong. 67% rainforest, 13% tropical savannas, and also 20% really high mountains, the Andes. So it's this mixture that is this ecosystem that is the Amazon. And the rest I'm not going to go over due to the time. Bioeconomy. The Amazon nowadays, modern economy, 53% agriculture, cattle ranching, and fish farming activities, 31% trading, 16% manufacture. But sustainable development of the region stimulate regenerative practice in order to ensure social inclusion, quality of life, in addition to the conservation of the biodiversity and the ecosystems. It's essential. This is something that we don't talk about. And science needs to discuss this. There is a fight. We need to fight crime in the region. And this is reflecting on deforestation and also mining. They are mining because there is a buyer on the other side. They are having crime because we have drugs that are being consumed everywhere. So if we don't pay attention globally, we will not have an answer. The warming, the climate change, the warming of the Amazon is indeed a fact. And also increased frequency of extreme climate events like floods and droughts is impacting the whole area. And part of the Amazon, instead of being the one that consumes carbon, is producing carbon. So there are several aspects of science, social science, climate change, physics, chemistry, biology, everything you can study in the region. And in here, there is something that's beautiful. It's called the flowing rivers. The flying rivers. What happens? It's curious, people didn't believe in that. Well, I may tell you, there was a terrible drought in Uruguay. Uruguay is the south part of the South America. And do you know why? Because of the flying rivers. Also, extremes. Now, about 2 weeks ago, Rio Grande do Sul, the south of Brazil, they had a flood, more than 20 cities completely destroyed because the amount of water that came to. And if we want to look at the 17 SDGs, I can tell you, studying the Amazon, you can have the 17 SDGs covered, from social, from education, from climate change. And to finalize, I take this, as TWAS, I'm the vice president for the Latin American and the Caribbean, but I'm also at IANAS, which is the academies from America that are part of IAP. And we had a meeting in Manaus, and this is part of the letter that we delivered before at the Amazon Summit. Science, technology, innovation play crucial roles in addressing the challenges and opportunities in the Amazon region. Effective development models require a comprehensive approach to ensure sustainable production and consumption of natural resources while promoting social and economic advance to indeed impact climate, environmental change, and global biodiversity. I want to thank TWAS, the Brazilian Academy, and my alma mater, the Federal University of São Paulo. Thank you so much.
Okay, I would like to say to Professor Nader, obrigado. Very much. And in particular, I would like to extend the thanks to all panelists for more than one reason, but I will start with one reason. Good timing. We now have plenty of time for discussion and interaction. Normally in these panel sessions, in my experience, we always run out of time and we cannot have any questions, but you've been great. So huge thanks for this timekeeping. Perhaps I can kick off a discussion by asking you this question that all of your 4 interventions to me highlight perhaps there is a common aspect. It seems that whether we're talking about AIDS with young women and the social implications of what Professor Abdool Karim described, or whether we're talking about the environment that Professor AlMomin said, the environmental catastrophes linked to the conflict and the oil, and also the power of science there, or the neglected diseases, or the Amazon and climate change and indigenous people within the Amazon, all of these, to me, link to ethical issues. I think ethics is very much highlighted by your focus and your effort directing scientific endeavor towards serious ethical issues that have also social implications. So my question is, how can science help to make politics, propaganda, media, and economics more ethical?
I like how I always get put to speak first. Now, Max wasn't supposed to ask us difficult questions like this, But I think it's a good thing that he raises this issue, because science is so much tied to social justice. And it is about inequities, it is about inequalities. And when we think about health, it usually is reflective of wealth. Healthy nations equals wealthy nations. And so each of us reflected on priorities in the different regions we come to and particular populations. And I just wanted to go back to the issue of young women and HIV in sub-Saharan Africa. It is fundamentally about gender and power dynamics. It is about the lack of power, and we've done so well in terms of ensuring young children survive equally, young girls and boys to age 10. At secondary sexual development, what we see is this divergence between boys and girls, and young girls falling pregnant while they're still children. I consider a teenager still a child, puts that child on a very different trajectory. Not finishing high school, economic possibilities challenged, but also the status of women being reduced through this. And in a continent where we have a lot of women-headed households, it makes them continuously dependent on men and being part of vicious cycles of poverty and dependency. And so when I talk about HIV, I'm also reflecting on a fundamental issue of power. And what we see is how can science, women in science, and others in science trying to solve this problem. It's not simply about HIV, but it's about sexual reproductive health. It's about sexual reproductive health rights. And I could spend a long time talking about this, but I think most of you are familiar of how challenging in one of our SDGs that Helena put up, SDG 5, talks about gender equity. Here we are in the 21st century, and it is shocking when we're on the brink of an existential crisis that we're still trying to control half the world, when what we need is diversity and inclusivity and all of our minds coming together to take on our challenges. If that's not social justice, I don't know what is. So let me hand over. I'm not, Helena, you look like you're ready.
Okay. Well, very briefly, I would say that ethics is something that when you go to philosophers, they say that the ethics depends on what for me is unethical, for other civilization may be ethical. It's hard to understand that, but there are some topics, they try to convince me. And when I listen to them, I really understand what they are saying. But there are some topics that we need to really make happen in a global society, which means respect the other, respect their political option, their religious options, and all this cannot influence government. Government has to be political in the sense of bringing justice, equilibrium, equity to society, but cannot have, and that's the point where we are doing our worst behavior, religious. My religion must prevail over yours. If we go on with this, we're going to see a quick, not in a year or two, but a devastation of the world, because nobody is superior to the other. And I think that we ask ethical behavior for some countries, but we forget to ask ethical behavior for others. And either we all play ethically, either we all respect the United Nations, either we do that, or I don't think we're going to achieve the beauty that Professor said regarding having kids that are not as teenagers or even less than a teenager in some countries, bearing children and giving birth because of ethical or political situations.
Thank you, Helena. You see, SDGs have been one of the most important events in human history where we have set for ourselves certain goals and we have promised that we will try to fulfill. SDG 3 says health for all. The question is that if you leave the healthcare, the drug discovery and development, the development of diagnosis, rehabilitation and other aspects of healthcare to commercial enterprises which are designed to make money, then how can you expect that health for all can be achieved? Because there is no money available for many of these diseases, these prevalent neglected diseases or rare diseases, and if there is no money, no one is really interested of working in it. Now, this is one aspect of ethics. The other is that we all scientists are working, many of us are actually working on the science of these diseases, and that we have got interested in these diseases also, and we keep publishing. They use our results, they use a lot of these results which we do basic fundamental research on different diseases, and they carefully select the one which can help them to make money, while there is very little money is coming for the diseases research which are in neglected tropical diseases or neglected diseases per se. So there are a lot of ethical issues, and I do not really see until there is a paradigm change. There is a political will, the constituency and open science motivate people and educate them that these are the facts, they are real numbers, I'm not really sure how many of you knew that there are 1.67 billion people are affected from neglected tropical diseases. These numbers are very, very important, and if these numbers are really placed, and if we know through open science that these diseases are causing tremendous difficulties and miseries in the life of people, then we may be able to change the political will, the course of actions, and we may be able to change the paradigm also.
Okay, I thank Professor AlMomin for giving space to questions from the audience.
I have one quick question. One to Mr. Quarraisha. I think I'm audible to people. And the other one is to Professor Helena Nader. So the HIV disease which you have come across in Africa, is it sexually transmitted or is due to the medical facilities where blood transfusion is the main cause for that? And to Nader, Helena, can you hear? What is the reason for the brown color of Amazon, which you said that the color is not green, it's brown? So these are two quick questions.
So I'll go very quickly. We're talking about sexual transmission. We have very good screening of blood and blood products, so we can exclude that as a route of transmission. It's really sexual transmission that is the bulk of the transmission that we're seeing.
I'm not a specialist in the theme, but I know it's pH, the amount of materials dissolved in the water, as well as the amount of oxygen. So that if you look, there is this that's always brown, and there is another one that's called Rio Negro. And when the two waters get together in Manaus, they don't mix for miles and miles because of the density and the pH of the water. But that's as far as I can go.
Any questions from the audience? Yes, one right there.
Yes, my question is for Professor Nader. My name is Josu. Okay. I think you did really well focusing on the social aspect, not only on the scientific aspect. But I have a question that all these problems you mentioned, the deforestation and destroying of ethical cultures and those things are done in a big percentage by big corporations that want the land for making profit. So, those are so big powers. Which the strategy for fighting against those problems? Thank you.
It's not only big corporations. You have illegal people that cut the trees and sell those trees to other countries, besides the countries in Latin America. So there are, and the mining, because there is there is gold in the area. And this gold means money. And people come from everywhere to do this mining. And besides destroying the forest, they use something that's forbidden everywhere, that's mercury. And mercury is volatile. So besides everything that I told you in here, there is also another problem, because the water that comes to the south comes with mercury also. So we are contaminating the whole atmosphere in the area with the illegal mining, because there are other ways of doing mining. So it's a huge problem, and it has to be faced not only by the local governments. We need to have an involvement of all the 8 countries and France. Do not forget that's a territory. And let's be very blunt. France was not at the summit. So that takes a message to take home. Europe has to be involved. Not saying that we need to keep the forest up. In order to keep the forest up, you need to give ways of survival for the families, the indigenous, plus other communities that live by the rivers that are called ribeirinhos, quilombolas. There are several. I just brought to you the indigenous. It's a global achievement. And there are several groups doing fantastic work. I see Professor here. He's from the Science Panel for the Amazon. And we are trying our best at the Science Panel for the Amazon. But we need to get more people involved and pay attention to the people that live there. It's not that to keep the forest up, you need to give education, and you need to give them ways of survival. And just like we have a cell phone, they're entitled also to have a cell phone, to have communication. So we need to do this. Thank you for your question.
Sorry. I cannot.
Thank you. Hi, my name's James. I have a question for Professor AlMomin. Because you talked about GMOs and so, like, helping the world. But here, for example, in Europe, the people that develop new technologies with GMOs faces a lot of problems with laws and legislation that we can use. Although we can develop the technology, maybe we cannot use it because of the laws in Europe. So what do you have to, like, why do you think, it's clear that technology advances further than laws, but why do you think, like, that is?
You're not supposed to ask controversial, difficult questions. Well, you witnessed all the controversy about GMOs. Regulations keep changing. The percentage that they use to that is allowed in GMOs, it's becoming down and down. Europe is absolutely they're against. Now, the regularity systems in every country is different. And this comes to the ethical questions also. How ethical is ethics, especially in the economical and investment and business world that we are witnessing. Having said that, there are, in the science diplomacy that we talk about, the GMOs served as a bridge to countries who needed it. It's developed by advanced countries. It is claimed for the underdeveloped countries. The undeveloped countries need a lot of things. If you suffer, you accept. If you're hungry, you eat anything. So there is a market for everything. It is not always luxury to be in a developed country where you actually can have a force and regulation to manage and control others. But developed countries, they have their own particular situations. A lot of them, they can't afford not having food, not having water. Now the climate is totally different. Arid areas, deserts. How to get food to our country, to my country? It's not agriculture. We have to import. You have to balance what's your priorities and how to accept it. Don't accept what's forced on you. Assess it, evaluate it. Is it good for you? Then make your decisions. But the controversy go on. I can give you one example. I told you that I was doing the cloning of the sheep. And how much I learned about the ethics of science at that time, where science was accepted or not accepted, no middle ground. I had so much, I had to face the people, international, the Middle East, and you know the beliefs, the religious, their regulations. I have to justify why am I doing this, and I had a lot of opposition. I had to go on TV, radios, newspapers, but that educated people. So it made me proud that I taught the people the awareness. I had a lot of students who after that wanted to be specialized in genetics and biotechnology. So it was a change of trend. But then I had to face the religious people, and a lot of them, they said, oh, it's taboo. Okay, so I justify, and then with time, I said, okay, after a lot of religious studies, they said, oh, okay, so we can eat it. Even though ethically they are my babies and I don't want them to eat it because I produce them. But you do face controversies in everything, all the sciences. And it goes through history with all the medical sciences, with everything. So it's assessment and regulations and ethics. Thank you.
I felt very honored to listen to you this evening. I hope the whole of the audience shares my feeling of being honored. So I thank you so much for sharing with us your perspectives, and I would like to conclude with one little observation for the audience. Notice the gender imbalance of this panel. And be happy, because this is one of those rare cases in which gender imbalance is welcome. Goodbye.